Okay, we're recording. Thank you for joining us for this virtual seminar. Because we've had so much to share with you, this is the second part of our series. I'm one of your presenters today. I'm Linda Fulmer, the Executive Director of Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration.
And I'm Jesse Herrera, the Executive Director of CoAct, and we'd like to welcome back any previous attendees on part one of our presentation. On this, we're really going to focus more on the nuts and bolts of our operation and some of the insights that we've gained over the past 2 years while working on Grow Southeast.
So just as a reminder, in case you didn't join us for part one, Grow Southeast is a cohort between the Office of Commissioner Roy Charles Brooks, Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration, and CoAct. And the initiative is aimed at addressing food and economic inequities in Southeast Fort Worth. Our group interfaces directly with community members on a recurring basis, and insights gained are coordinated and addressed through our steering committee and network of partners.
Yes, and the reason why we decided to focus and develop this project is because many of the neighborhoods in Southeast Fort Worth lie within an identified USDA food desert. Nearly all the restaurants are fast food, and within the 34.8 square mile area, there are just 2 grocery stores and more than 100 convenience stores selling mainly unhealthy snacks, tobacco, and alcohol. High poverty rates, lack of economic opportunities, and lack of transportation options all help fuel food and job insecurity.
And I can speak from a personal perspective. In 1980, I moved to East Fort Worth and moved into a house in a neighborhood called Southeast Meadowbrook, just a couple of blocks north of used to be the Cavill Housing Project. At that time, there were 8 supermarkets within 3 miles of my house. Today, there only one of those 8 supermarkets still remains. So, and over the time when I moved to that neighborhood, it was a working class neighborhood of original homeowners from the 40s and 50s. And as they moved on, the neighborhood was kind of taken over by investors who did not improve the homes. And it became a predominantly renter-occupied neighborhood, low-income renters. Grow Southeast provides resources, training, and municipal navigation services to launch new community-based farms and help each become a successful, self-sufficient business or organization. As each farm scales, they'll be able to add additional value in the jobs they create, the food they harvest, and the hope they bring for future entrepreneurs. As we launch our first cohort of growers, we are excited to see the possibilities this initiative will be. So Jesse, who is CoAct?
Yes, CoAct. So CoAct has been a work in the making for 5 years, but we're a fairly new nonprofit. We actually got our incorporation right before COVID-19 hit. So it's been very interesting trying to navigate the norm that COVID-19 is bringing over these past 3 or 4 months. CoAct is a social impact organization that explores, discovers, and deploys community-centered solutions to address today's most pressing social challenges. Our approach builds on the benefits of human-centered design to develop collective approaches, advance new ideas, and create a strategic response to today's challenges. Our work shifts traditional patterns of power and resources to understand the nuances of today's challenges and benefit the communities most affected. It's a very fancy way of saying that we conduct research so we can better understand the challenges at hand and so we can design better, more tangible solutions. Our process is really focused on engaging those communities that are most affected and making sure that they have a voice that is active throughout the duration of the project. And Linda, tell us a little bit about Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration and the work that you're doing and the insights that you're bringing with the amazing network of partners that you've gathered.
Yes, Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration got started in 1997. And initially, we were convened as a platform for bringing together hospitals, public health, and universities to work on community health improvement. And you can see on the left side of the slide our member systems. But since I've been with the organization, for the last several years. We've added other community partners. And while you may not have heard of Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration, I'm sure you've heard of at least some of these organizations listed on the slide. I serve as the executive director on a half-time contract. And when I say Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration, HTCC, or we, I'm intentionally, that's sort of shorthand for all of these organizations that are listed on the slide. So that's kind of the power of collaboration. And we've been doing a lot of work around food insecurity through both retail, healthy retail policies and strategies, as well as the urban agriculture. So with that, we will get into what is the challenge. Food insecurity is a major social determinant of health in both East and Southeast Fort Worth. However, food insecurity is more than just having a lack of access to food. It's also a lack of economic opportunities, often perpetrated by many shared and overlapping factors. Many of these factors can be the result of both intentional and unintentional policies aimed at certain communities. And like I told you with my story with Southeast Meadowbrook, the community changed as original homeowners aged and moved out, and then opportunistic investors moved in. We recognize that any solution in addressing food insecurity will require long-term solutions that foster local economic opportunities and empower the communities most affected by these policies.
Absolutely. And with food insecurity, we've probably become aware of it, or at least experienced it to some extent. I think there's still some literacy around what food insecurity really means, but the symptoms can be seen as obvious indicators. Some of these come through lack of employment options, or lack of transit, or lack of income. The obvious sign is usually some form of lack of access to basic service. However, there's much more at play with food insecurity, and when we look a little deeper into the issue, more pressing factors arise. So food insecurity, like as mentioned, is often the result of unintentional and intentional policies. In understanding the extent of economic and food insecurity, we have to take a broader look at this challenge and some of the historical landmarks. So if we take a little trip back to Modesto, California in 1885, we see how certain communities have been targeted with intentional and unintentional policies to derive wealth and opportunities. In Modesto, 1885, zoning was used to banish warehouses and public laundries, mostly operated by Chinese immigrants, to keep them from entering the city. In New York, 1916, zoning was also used to keep manufacturing buildings out of off of Fifth Avenue as an attempt to keep Jewish garment workers off the street and away from high-end retail customers. In 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation categorized loan capacity based on race, limiting communities of color in being able to qualify for mortgages. This is often referred to as redlining. Redlining denied many Black and Latino families the ability to qualify for loans, which inhibited their ability to generate wealth through home ownership. Though outlawed in 1965, the effects still linger in many of the communities to this day. And this can also be attributed to some of the lack of home ownership rates for some of these communities. Wage disparity still exists between white men and men of color. And the gap is even wider for women, with Black and Hispanic women earning less than 70% of the income for comparable work as compared to white men. With the increasing cost of living, particularly in housing, healthcare, and education, these disparities contribute to a rising amount of food insecurity. So kind of a little bit off tangent, one of the other projects that we're working on is addressing college homelessness. And in that, we've acquired recent data that shows that college students are beginning to experience food insecurity at a much higher rate. Right now in Tarrant County College, over 30% of the students experience food insecurity, over 50% experience housing insecurity. And the most recent data that we received showed this consistent trend of having to juggle priorities. Do I purchase food for this month? Do I pay rent for this month? Or do I go to college this month? Do I take care of, paying for the babysitter this month, going to college, or do I pay for food? Food always comes back into a choice. Do I make money to actually buy a good piece of food, or do I, spend the money paying for my bills? This is an existing reality, and this is prior to COVID. These wage, so just things to think about. Segregation policies also help fuel a mass flight of resources from existing communities, often leaving many communities of color with limited options. Um, as desegregation became mandatory, many white families vacated communities, leaving an economic void in many neighborhoods that can still be seen today. With little incentive to reinvest in these communities from both public and private sectors, many neighborhoods fell into decay. And this kind of goes back to what Linda was talking about with absentee investors. Um, Typically, you get people that are more opportunistic that are just looking at it from the profit margin. And unfortunately, a lot of these investors don't even live in these communities. So for them, it's just trying to milk every last penny that they can out of the property. As cities look to spur development, especially in older deprived neighborhoods, incentives and abatements are created to pay for infrastructure, facade improvements, or roads using tax allocated funding. However, as land values increase, existing families, many from communities of color, often get displaced in what's known as gentrification. The additional need to pay back tax dollars used to spur development also contributes to the increased land prices, often situating these neighborhoods to be accessible only to affluent families. So typically the way that this takes form is that, we have to pay back these tax dollars that we use to build these streets or to improve this facade or to build this building. So now we have to increase your tax rate on your property, which means you have to pay more for that property. Um, when we look back at how this applies to what I mentioned about wage disparities, this can often limit communities affected by these policies, uh, and basically situate them where they can only afford to live in neighborhoods where resources are limited. This can help fuel a new cycle of poverty, which for many can be a difficult summit to overcome. I mean, even something as simple as a bad credit score can deny loan capacity, and eviction notice can make it very difficult to acquire stable housing, all which have become increasing concerns with COVID-19. And just to share another personal story too, and how this can affect individuals, another one of the students that we were trying to address, that we were trying to help, was a previous, was previously convicted of a crime, and they were enrolled in school, trying to get a job, trying to better themselves, trying to, live, improve upon themselves. However, they couldn't qualify for an apartment. They couldn't get a job. So they were stuck with very limited options. And just small things like this can really add up. It helps fuel this food insecurity and the other insecurities that come with it. In the light of the recent events, the effects of racism and race-based tactics has also taken a spotlight, illuminating additional challenges Black and Latino families still face. These ultimately affect a family's financial stability and the capacity, which ultimately will affect their food insecurity. Without disposable income, local businesses will shut down, employment options will become limited, and support systems vacate, increasing the propensity of this challenge. Lastly, food waste also plays a big part of this challenge. Between 30 and 40% of the waste produced in the USA is food. This equates to about 133 billion pounds of food per year. In Fort Worth, our landfills are reaching capacity, spurring the development of waste diversion programs, such as composting. Since the 1930s, the percentage of American farming went from 90% to 2%. This staggering reduction has resulted in the aggregation of a small collection of large farms that supply most of the country's food. As farms have become bigger and more industrialized, the need for large markets to meet their supply becomes necessary. These large markets are difficult for smaller local farms participating in, limiting opportunities for employment in urban agriculture. Every pound of food that's thrown away is a meal that could be fed to a family. However, without a diversified food system to provide alternative buying options, our food purchases will support this industrialized system and the waste that's associated with it. So we need to take a real deep breath real quick just to kind of understand that this is a very vast challenge. There's a lot that's associated with food insecurity, and there's still other aspects that we didn't really get to go into a lot of detail on. But this paints a picture that there's more at stake than just getting food to a family. There are economic barriers, there are intentional racial barriers, and we have to be honest in accepting that, embracing that, and as we work to try to address food insecurity, trying to find solutions that empower those communities and overcome these specific factors.
So that brings us to where we fit in. So what are we doing? Grow Southeast is focused on creating community-centered solutions through urban farms. Each of the farms is community-owned and operated, and we work collectively with each of the growers and have established a framework to ensure their voice is present through the implementation of the project. We want them to be successful, and we want them to be successful to the point that they don't need us any longer. But we also want them to be collectively successful as a network, so that they know one another and they can be a support for one another. So that in doing that, they become a community that's empowered to shape their future, hopefully opening other opportunities for innovation. So what are we? What do we actually do? A day at Grow Southeast requires many hats. We toggle between nurturing the relationships of our growers, building volunteer opportunities, creating toolkits, finding resources to address specific needs, negotiating with the city on interpretation of the urban agriculture ordinance, and other roles. Over the past year, most of our task has been focused on getting the farms developed. This has required Jesse to fall back on some of his professional skills as a developer to design construction documents, navigate the permitting process, and help bring in construction personnel to accomplish certain items. One thing that we've done is Healthy Tarrant County Collaboration was able to get some grant money to purchase this wonderful two-wheel tractor, which is a shared equipment for all of the farmers. This is a BCS 739 tractor with two attachments. We have a rotary plow attachment, which you see attached in this slide, and then we also have a rear tine tiller. As a group, Grow Southeast provides training to the growers and volunteers interested in getting their hands dirty and operating this tractor.
Absolutely, and I will add this: it's a very fun piece of equipment to learn to use. It's almost like, you know, learning a riding, I guess you could say a riding lawnmower or a bike, and once you get the hang of it, it is fun. And
it can cut through clay like butter. We also coordinate volunteers. In this slide, you'll see our consulting farmer, Charlie Blaylock, operating the BCS. Our farmers are individuals for the most part, and they need help. So volunteers are an essential part of building the success story. We've established a shared platform using Sign Up Genius. We meet with the growers monthly to establish volunteer needs and add them to the system to be shared with the volunteers we've recruited to date. We've also trained some of the growers to use the system themselves so they can coordinate their own efforts. And all of the opportunities are posted on our website, which will be listed on the question slide at the end of this presentation. We always need more volunteers. There's never enough. So if you are interested in becoming a volunteer, please contact us.
Absolutely.
And then community engagement. Jesse, you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, engagement is a big part of this. I mean, part of it is engaging the broader community to let them know what we're doing. And also, these are opportunities for us to educate you know, the community about food insecurity, and also educate the youth about the potential of agriculture and the importance of agriculture. So last year, we celebrated Arbor Day at one of the farms that we were helping. We brought together a group of community members, and we actually invited the neighboring Maud Logan Leadership Academy to participate. The students from the academy got to spend a half day on the farm and learn about the importance of agriculture and trees while planting tomatoes in a young live oak tree. Following this event, our group helped put together a coordinated youth education program. We helped establish a couple of additional media outlets for the farm, and we helped invite a recognized thought leader to tour the farms and offer their insight into addressing this pressing challenge. That thought leader was Malik Yakini, and it was done through partnership with TCU and the Blue Zones Project, which we were very appreciative of. Mr. McKinney spent a full day with us, touring the farms, offering his insights to the farmers, and really just being an open ear and hearing about the challenges that we were going through and helping provide direction and hope for, you know, the work that we're doing. There was also another interesting insight that Mr. Malik brought to us, which, you know, has been a kind of a present term in our presentation, and that's food desert. He offered his insight in terms of how that word can be misinterpreted just because of the way that it's spelled out. In it, he mentioned that food desert often, when you think of the word desert, refers to a naturally occurring phenomenon. But as as we revisit some of these things that we said in the previous slides, we know now that food insecurity is not a natural event. These were very intentional tactics, and in some cases unintentional tactics that were taken that have resulted in this situation. So we need to be honest in accepting that nothing about this challenge is natural. This is this is an intentional effort, so we need to be intentional in trying to address it. And I think, Ms. Linda, you had some insights into how we're looking at reframing this challenge.
Yes, I think that we, instead of using the term food desert all the time, it should be more viewed as a healthy food opportunity area. There's an opportunity to bring healthier food into the area. As you said, a desert means that there's no food. And we do know that even in these low access food insecure neighborhoods, there often are places where people can buy food. They just don't have the word Kroger or Albertsons or Tom Thumb emblazoned on the outside.
Absolutely. I think that's part of it. It's just, with these engagements and with these opportunities, being able to show what's really present, but also, like I said, letting our community know what food insecurity actually means, and, how this term can be misconstrued sometimes to show, what some could see as a naturally occurring event. Well, this is just how things happen. Um, so these have been very helpful. I mean, these engagements, like I said, help us in, really build those relationships with our community leaders, as shown here with Commissioner Brooks with the students at Maud Logan. But there are hopefully, there will be opportunities for future engagements as we get through this COVID-19, condition. But that takes us to kind of the core of our work, design. Uh,
Yes. Navigating the urban agriculture ordinance has required our group to take extensive efforts in developing drawings to fulfill the requirements of the permitting process. Now, this has been an evolution. Keep in mind that the urban agriculture ordinance was passed in 2016, and our farmers were the first people in the city to attempt to obtain the permits described in the ordinance, because it was new, and this happens with all new ordinances. There's a lack of understanding, of consistent understanding between the various staff and departments involved in the permitting process. So when we were getting started, I asked the staff person in charge of development, well, what do we need for a site plan? And she said, oh, it can be very simple. You can just take a piece of notebook paper and pencil and draw it out. Well, we learned that actually, because of some of the other requirements of the process that's covered by other departments, it has to be a lot more technical than that. So this required Jesse to brush up on his design skills and start developing some, as you can see, something that's a lot more complicated than a piece of notebook paper with a pencil drawing.
Absolutely. It's been pretty interesting kind of brushing up on some of these skills, because some of these softwares I haven't touched since I was in college. So it's been about 10, 12 years since I've got to practice. But it has been it has been an interesting hurdle, really learning these drawings and, trying to figure out what information we actually need to capture for these projects, which really takes us, I think, to the other big aspect of this challenge, which is navigation.
Yes.
Navigating has been quite the hurdle as well. So the drawings only represent a piece of getting your permits. You actually have to go through the process of getting the permit and getting all the checks for each of the individual departments. As we've been navigating, and really the reason why we're doing this is going through these extensive permitting processes so we can get this certificate of occupancy, so the farms can legitimately grow food on their land. We've learned as we've gone through this process that there are conditions in which we have to go through this, and then there are situations like in the case of the homestead farm where you can get exempt from some of these processes. So all these have been, like I said, learned as we've gone through them. Similar in developing the drawings, navigating the permit process has been a hurdle since this is our first attempt at trying to do something at this scale. Um, we mentioned that the ordinance is relatively new, and because of that, there wasn't really a standard operating procedure released when this was implemented. So the experience is very different depending on who you get. In one visit, we were, asked to pay $250 for a permit and provide some pretty extensive technical drawings. At a subsequent return visit, we got a different individual and we got a very different experience that didn't result in having to pay $250 for a permit, and allows us to get to that next step of the process. So what this brought to our attention is that, we need to figure a way to actually, create a consistent experience, because for us, it's not as big of a deal because this is what we do as an organization. But for any individual at the city of Fort Worth that has to spend 2 or 3 hours out of their day, especially if it's 2 or 3 hours of paid time out of their day, just to get told no, this is going to be a very discouraging experience, and it's going to hinder the potential of developing these farms. Um, so that's been where the majority of our effort has been focused. Um,
And keep in mind that the staff in the permitting office are used to dealing with construction engineers and contractors and architects. So they're not used to really interfacing with people who are trying to start an urban farm. So that's part of the disconnect in communication. It's not intentional. It's just that we're trying to get permits for something that is just not something they encounter every day. And as we all know with our jobs, what you're used to is easy, and when something new shows up, it can be very confusing.
yes, and what I'll add as additional detail to this is, there's when developing these farms, the urban agriculture lays out a very kind of clear guideline of what you should do and what things are permanent or not permanent. However, it's in those real nuanced details when you start triggering other ordinances. So one of those that we've kind of hit on a reoccurring basis is urban forestry, and there are what they call canopy percentages that we have to meet. And basically what that means is we have to have a certain percentage of the land covered by tree canopy. And this has been somewhat of a contested item for some of our farms because, these are old sites and they haven't really been touched in, 30 or 40 years. And just the simple act of developing these farms and trying to produce vegetables has triggered this ordinance where in some cases we were being asked to plant additional trees even though we weren't cutting down any trees. So we've had to be very flexible and nimble in trying to navigate this, and strategic in terms of how we collaborate with the city of Fort Worth. Um, the other aspects is, really just in the nuances of how certain aspects of the ordinance are interpreted. Another one is sheds. Originally, when we started this project, it was the interpretation that sheds would be exempt from permits. As we got into it, we learned very quickly that that wasn't the case. Most of the city folk were interpreting sheds as accessory structures, and as such, they required a pretty substantial permitting process in order to build. So it was just finding all these areas where the ordinances didn't quite align up. And in doing so, we're trying to create a robust toolkit and document that will allow us to hopefully help streamline this process. The good news is, even though we've gone through quite a mess, we have amassed a couple of champions with the city of Fort Worth that have been very helpful in helping us navigate this. And it is our hope as we press forward that this will result in some streamlining, so this is a lot easier to navigate.
Yes. Another part of what we do is help our farmers developing and refining their strategies. Most of them have really grand hopes for what they would like to see their farms become, but they haven't always had the knowledge of how to bring that down into something that's more strategic and something that's more attainable. So we've been able to do some facilitated strategy sessions with them and to help them get a little bit more focused on what it is they're trying to do. This has also helped map out reasonable milestones and phases for implementing their visions to make it not as daunting. And this also has helped us identify opportunities to collaborate with each other and to identify other groups we need to develop relationships with to fulfill specific needs mapped out for 2, 3, 5 years down the road.
Absolutely. It's really helped us understand this challenge a little bit more in depth and how we as an organization can provide that additional service and capacity to help support our growers.
Yes, and so as Jesse mentioned, everything that we're doing is being documented and being put into what can become long-term toolkits, so that as other people begin developing urban farms here locally, they won't have to go through the growing pains that we've had to experience. So we'd like to have more of a comprehensive set of toolkits. For instance, with the city permitting process, we kind of envision a way that the city would have a toolkit for their staff that their staff can rely on, so that when some strange person shows up and says they want to start an urban farm, they can get that toolkit so that it'll help their staff understand what they need to do that's a little different from a construction permit. We've also been developing other toolkits for the growers to use and help in understanding how to develop strategies and so forth. So we hope that these toolkits can function as standard operating procedures with both the city and as a guideline for growers.
Absolutely. And some of those examples, as Linda mentioned, we're working on urban agricultural handbook that would help any individual be able to navigate the process. We've also developed volunteer guidelines for the farmers, which actually we're currently revising right now to take into account COVID-19.
Now, we've encountered, as you can imagine, we've encountered a lot of hurdles. Every project has hurdles. And when you have a hurdle, you can either stamp your feet and try to kick it, or you can try to figure out how do we manage this so that we have a win-win for everybody. So for example, with the municipal processes, we could have taken the position when we encountered some difficulty of, oh, you bad city people, you're trying to get in our way, let's just try to fight through and get our permits. But instead we tried to take it from a standpoint of building a partnership and jointly learning through the process to help in the future improve things. For our growers, they also have unique challenges. For one thing, most of our growers are one person, and they're trying to develop, grow food over 2, 3, 4 acres. And that's more than a one-person job. So, and growing food in North Texas means that we've got our climate is not all that friendly. It's extremely hot and dry in the summer. You can have weather switching back and forth from hot to cold and from wet to dry. Many of our soils are not all that fertile and require a lot of amendments. So there's a lot of natural hurdles for the farmers to overcome. But for projects like these, the biggest hurdle is building trust with the community. And the work is very rewarding, but it does require time and patience, especially if you're not part of the community already. Each of the farmers that we're working with has their own unique personality, and we have enjoyed taking the time to be intentional in learning from them and with them. Projects like this also require being nimble and flexible. Things change and shift quite a bit before you get to stable ground. We also have to be comfortable with the idea that sometimes things will fail altogether. That's also another opportunity for learning. It's all part of the process of getting to a solution. So I guess when it comes to hurdles, the most important thing to remember is persistence.
Indeed. Persistence and, just looking at the long term, what's going to create the long-term win. And, you mentioned, how we're working with the city of Fort Worth. I mean, it really is looking at it more from a we perspective. How can we create shared, sustained change?
And we do have a steering committee. Jesse, you want to talk a little more about that?
Yes. So we mentioned our framework a little before. We engage quite frequently with the growers on our network. So they represent kind of our growing community committee. We also have a steering committee that functions as both action and advisory to helping us with this challenge. So we meet on a monthly basis with the growers, and the insights that we gain from those meetings we bring to the steering committee, and then we decide how do we go about best, dividing and conquering the action items that are needed. Some of this could be, trying to find resources or solutions to specific grower needs. Some of this could be looking at how do we optimize some of our operations. Some of this could be, increasing our visibility with funders or volunteer organizations so we can get people to the farms. The tasks vary. It just kind of depends on, each of the individual farms. But we come from a wide collection of professions. We have what's listed here on the slide, but we've also been fortunate in recruiting some new members here recently that, are representing, public municipalities and also logistics operations. The work that we do is very rewarding. It allows us to be able to chip away at these challenges. And kind of as mentioned before, and with this consistent trend throughout this presentation, it's about collaboration. Collaboration is essential for addressing these types of challenges. This thing cannot be done alone. It does require efforts on multiple fronts, and it's something that's going to take time. So we've been very fortunate in the members that we have been able to gather, and we're very appreciative of the assistance that they've been able to provide as we've chipped away on this project.
And so impact to date, we've, I guess the first time that we all jumped up and down and cheered was when after 12 months of work, we got our first farm, Madia's farm, got their land use certificate of occupancy. That took about 12 months. It took about 18 months of work through the municipal processes to get approval to clear the land for Tabor Farm. That was quite a victory in itself. And through those efforts, I think, Jesse, you've mentioned that probably the most important impact is that we've created a very strong partnership with the city and actually have developed some internal champions who help navigating the process with the city. Let's see, with Opal's Farm, they started their first full year of production in 2019. And between February and September of 2019, they were able to grow and harvest about 3,500 pounds of food. This year, 2020, they are putting a second acre into cultivation and trying to increase their productivity per acre. Let's see, Mind Your Garden Urban Farm has got their first quarter acre in production. What else, Jesse? It seems like there's been a lot that's been achieved here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit on the high points. I mean, I would also say, just as a specific detail with Mind Your Garden Urban Farms, that they actually had their first harvest about a month ago. They had some tomatoes and peppers. But just as an organization and as a project, I mean, I think just the partnerships that we've established and the momentum that we built up to date have really been the big wins for me. I mean, just this partnership with the city of Fort Worth is so crucial in establishing that good, solid foundation that we can then build from. Because once we get that, then we can start looking at other ways that we can streamline policies and processes. This will also give us opportunities to start incubating these farmers with a lot more aggressive aggression. And hopefully, as we get more farms on the network, then we can start entertaining how we go about doing some of these other grand ideas like food hubs, food distribution, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, these are the initial building blocks. So it's going to be exciting to see what the next 2 or 3 years bring.
And that brings us to the conclusion of part 2 of our presentation. If you have questions, feel free to contact either Jesse or me. In addition, we have the website address listed at the bottom of the slide, and you can go on there and see more photos and learn more about each of the farms. And also, if you feel moved to join us as a volunteer or a steering committee member, or even a donor. There's a form on there, a contact form where you can put in your information, and we'll be back in touch with you really fast.
Absolutely. We look forward to hearing from you. We look more forward to even working with you and helping, and hopefully meeting you to help us on this journey in addressing food insecurity. This has been an exciting one.
So thank you.
Absolutely. Y'all have a good one, and we'll see you at the next one.
Okay.